Listen up.
All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to another forms class. Today we are talking about wells. Well. It's all about the well. Today we're going to be going over both the forms for not only the addendum for the 22R, but also the 22RA. Hold on, let me get back to my share screen. No, not all right. Hold on. So we got the 22R, which is the well addendum, and then we got to do the RN. So RN is the response, and it looks just like the 35R. It's funny how they like literally mirror it. So you guys are going to see as we go through this, but before we kind of kick that off, we got to look at the legal bulletin first. So water well legal requirements. Permits required. Washington state law requires every well in the state to have a certificate issued by the Department of Ecology, unless it meets one of the following exceptions. If the well was in use before June 6, 1945. Even so, the right to use the well could have been lost under the RCW 90.14 by failure to file a statement of claim to the water by June 30th, 1974, or for lack of continuous use since 1945. There's a lot of different things that kind of go into issues with wells for sure. Right before I started class, Chase Pennington was here from Access Home Closing, and I asked him what type of issues they see with properties that have wells, and he said, "Oh, tons. You know, it all depends." They had one issue that he talked about to where the seller knew they had a well, but when they went to go sell it, there was recorded that there was actually 8 people sharing that well, and this is the first time the house had ever been sold, and nobody knew that it was a shared well, not even the neighbors. And they literally had to go get a document signed door to door in order to sell the property and transfer that access to the water.
Oh my God, I'm at the
So that could be very bad, and that could seriously like delay your deal. I myself dealt with a well issue way back, and very, very similar. It was a shared well with 2 other neighbors, so there's 3 connections to the well. And it was a divorce situation that I was doing, and some of the neighbors absolutely hated the sellers. I ended up, one of the people were like, first they said no, they said they're not signing anything, they're not doing anything, they don't care. So we couldn't sell, we couldn't sell until we had it signed. We had to get the agreement to transfer the rights, or for them to agree to transfer the rights to a new owner. And anyway, one of the neighbors was like, "Well, I'm happy to see them go, but I don't want to cooperate in this thing," so it was one of those types of situations. I'm like, so then I had to come back later. I'm like, well, I guess you're going to be stuck with them for neighbors for life, because we can't sell your house without you signing this. And then they were like, okay, we'll sign it. And they finally caved in, and I had to go get the document signed in person. I had to hire a notary with me, come with me to witness the signature, get it stamped, do the whole thing to get the deal done. So it was pretty crazy. So hopefully you guys don't, as soon as a property's on a well, especially if you're going to be listing the property, you better start digging before you get that property on the market. Because there's nothing worse than you putting a property out there and then having to find out you got to get these types of signatures and all these things done before you like really delay things bad. So there are different things. Water quality testing is probably one of the biggest things. If a well serves 2 or more users, it is regulated by the State Department of Health. In some counties, the State Department of Health has delegated all or part of its regulatory responsibility to the counties. So check with your own county health department as to who handles it in your county. So if you got a property and it's being serviced by a well, find out which county it is, go to their county website, do a search for wells in that county, and they will provide you with all the type of stuff that you're gonna need. There's definitely some testings and stuff like that, that usually each year that should be tested. And of course, if you need help, seek advice from the State Department of Health if you need to. There could be some really old wells out there, old properties, old wells. There was one property we had to deal with way back in South Hill. It was, the property was way out in Graham, or it was like way out. I think it was even like almost Yelm, but it was out in the middle of nowhere. The property had an old well, but they did connect to water. And so they had kind of had the option of, using both if they wanted to, but you really got to find out what's going on with that well. Because I know that deal also caused some delays because they were concerned about, well, there's this well on my property, and like, what do we do with it? And what can we do with it? The listing broker didn't even have any idea. They're just like, I don't know. Like, so then you're kind of stuck in the situation of trying to find out for your client or where to send your buyer to go get the information for it, and what they could actually do with it. And one last story, we had someone buy property that we're going to build a house, right? It had an existing well that they subdivided. The lot, they ended up subdividing it and selling the lot. Well, they said it came with water, right? It didn't. There was water on the neighboring property. The well was there, but they were saying that you can connect in. But someone else, I think that they ended up selling the other lot, and then they were like, no, we're not sharing our well. So it was one of those things where, oh my goodness, you think you got water to a property, and if you can't get water there, it's not going to be worth anything. So water's a very important thing to have. All right. Well, addendum to purchase and sale agreement. Attach this addendum to the purchase and sale agreement if the sale is conditioned on an inspection of the well or water system. However, this form only covers inspections of the well serving the property. If buyer wants to condition the sale on an inspection of the property and its improvements in general, use inspection addendum form 35. So this well inspection, right? If you want to make it a full, complete inspection, you also need to have the 35 in there. And it's going to be perfectly clear when we get deeper into this. Alec, you want to read B?
No, second. All right, explain it to the parties. Make sure your client understands this addendum. In particular, explain to buyer that if a buyer fails to give written notice disapproving the inspection, buyer waives the inspection condition, and it will be contractually obligated to close, regardless of the condition of the well or water system.
Yeah, so they got to know and understand that it's up to them, right, to approve the inspection. It's the buyer, it's up to the buyer. Let's see, Jonathan, want to do C, other provisions?
Yeah, the provision of this addendum supersede any other provisions contained in the agreement to relate to wells or water system. Therefore, if use this form in a purchase and sale transaction, make certain that all of the provisions regarding the well or the water system are contained in the addendum.
Yeah, so well documents is D. Seller is required to deliver to buyer all documents in seller's possession associated with the well. So let's get in here. Oh, actually, let's get to the number of the forms. So that's just the, okay. Following numbers refer to the numbers in the sample in the shown in the manual. Date of the purchase and sale agreement, obviously it's the same as that you're writing it. The buyer's name, the seller's name, the property, insert the property address on the purchase and sale agreement. So the first thing we got to look at here, number 5, is number of connections. Indicate the number of connections to the well in the space provided. How are you guys going to find this out? How are you going to know how many connections there are?
common well or standalone well. And then, pull up all the essentially like navigable stuff of the well.
You can get online to the county and see what's recorded. Well, I mean, it can be in there. You can search online recorded docs. Anything to the parcel number for this parcel or address. Most of them search by the house number and just the street name. Just like if it was like 123 5th Street Northwest, you would put in 123 5th. That's it. And then it search, yeah, and it brings up more additional items for that, but hopefully the seller knows. You heard stories that I've already told you about different examples where they had no idea that there was more than one connection. It does state in the Form 17, I believe, that if there's any wells, right? Let's get to our 17 real quick. I will go to the manual in case there's anything in depth about well. We'll go look here. We'll go wells, not dwellings. Dwellings, anything else? Well, so water, household water, the source of water for the property is, there's private or publicly owned water system, private well serving only the subject property. And the next is, if shared, are there any written agreements? What do you guys recognize on this number, line 67? What do you see in that?
That'd be like a communal well, right? Like their community.
There's something at the very beginning of that. If, what's before the if? The asterisk. What does that mean? What's
They have to give you.
Description at the
reference or
bottom.
description.
it says, we'll go back up. We'll go look at the form itself. If any answer is yes to any asterisk items, please explain on attached sheets. Please refer to the number or to the line number or numbers of the question or questions you provide your explanations. Okay? So that. Oh, I already passed that. Take a bit of water. So if they say, yep, here there's that, and as if shared, are there any written agreements? If they mark yes, that means you better go to page 5 at the bottom and look and see what they wrote. If it's missing,
We got a problem.
probably got an issue. There's one little hint you can look at right away now to start digging in deeper. So if that's marked, or what if it's marked, but they say don't know? That's another warning signal that you probably gonna have to start digging in a little deeper.
Let's do it anyways.
So.
Smart, digging the well, dig.
There's probably an easement
Dig in.
recorded, it'll be on title report.
There might be easements recorded on title, yep, so pulling up that listing, looking in the supplemental report for that preliminary title report. You can look and see if, that there's any information about the well, and that is also, also you could do that. All right, let's continue. So the next thing is seller's representations. So seller represents that, except as explained below, to the best of seller's knowledge, the well and water supply system serving the property, A, provide an adequate supply of household and yard water for seller's use. B, are not presently contaminated by biological or chemical agents. Or C, comply with all applicable local, state, and federal laws, standards, and regulations, including applicable purity standards. And D, have no other material defects. So back up to 5. Whoop. Okay, so well documents review period. That's the next section. Insert the number of days seller has to provide any well documents to buyer. 10 days is the default. Insert the number of days buyer has to give written notice disapproving the well documents. 5 days is the default for that. So what's a good timeline for getting documents from the seller? What do you think?
anywhere, in my opinion, 7 to 14 days for the documents, but to do an inspection on a well and do that stuff, minimum 2 weeks.
Yeah. We're almost there. We'll be talking about that. So pay attention to the default days that this addendum's telling you. You see that this one says 10. How many people like know exactly where their records and everything they have that they have for their wells? I mean, you got some people who are completely organized and you can go into their filing cabinet and they got everything numbered and lettered and it's alphabetically ordered and, starred and there's those kind of people. And then there's people just throw stuff into a bin and you're just like, I don't know. I know I got it somewhere. If you're the listing brokers, you know the property's on a well, start working with the seller right away to say, look, we got to get every documentation you have about the well.
Just like a septic.
Yeah.
Have it all done. before
Have it all
you
done
list it.
before you list it. It's really key, especially when it comes to if there's multiple connections, if it's a shared well, and if there's any sort of transfer process for the wells. If there's anything like that at all, we've seen some too where people have to pay a fee and have it done and recorded. Like the ones we had to do, had to be notarized. I mean, the whole thing had to be notarized and everything. And if you have other people, like you'd have to go to them and get the stuff done. You don't want your deals delayed, so you should be on top of that. I don't know, 10 days? I mean, that's probably pretty good, and I think the 5 days is probably good enough. If buyer's sole discretion does not give notice disapproval within 5 days of receipt of the above documents or the date that the above documents are due, whichever is earlier, then this well documents review period shall conclusively be deemed satisfied and waived. If buyer gives timely notice of disapproval, this agreement shall terminate and the earnest money shall be refunded to buyer. If buyer was to do this and they terminate, there's 2 forms you need. So the 22RN we're going to show next. So that'd be the first one. What other form would you include with that 22RN? Close. Is it a 50 or a 51?
Future.
51. I'd have to go back and look at
51's is a rescission. A rescission does what? Do you guys remember?
Cancels, but doesn't give the
Earnest money,
back.
yeah.
Maybe. Well, 51's of rescission, meaning like you're resetting the entire transaction to back before that you really even had an agreement, is what you're telling, it's what you're saying. You're saying that it's completely done, dead, over, even before it kind of started, like that type of situation. Usually a 51 is being used when you do not have a legal excuse to get out. So a 50 is always going to go hand in hand with this phrase. That's the easiest way to remember in your minds. If the buyer has a legal excuse to get out, then you will see this exact phrase. It's used throughout a bunch of our contingencies. If buyer gives timely notice of disapproval, then this agreement shall terminate and the earnest money shall be refunded to buyer. When you read that and you hear that, and that's in one of the choices that the buyer's making that decision, you know, if earnest money's been deposited, you're gonna need not only the form that you're using for that process, but also the form 50, because that's just the authorization to disperse, to release the earnest money back to the buyer. Because you don't want to use a rescission and when the buyer's walking away from any type of a contingency where they have a legal excuse to actually terminate. So that's the easiest way to remember.
50 call?
Authorization to disperse earnest money
Okay, thanks.
or to release earnest money. It's one of it's disperse. Is it disperse? Yeah. So that's the difference. I've had that question probably like 4 times in the last like 2 months, I know for sure. So it's like, I always try to throw that in if I see it.
What is 51 read down?
51 is the rescission of purchase and sale agreement. So that's a complete rescission of it.
How is that different than 50?
It's
50's giving out earnest money.
50 you're using because you have legal excuse. We'll get to that form in forms class. We're still going down the order. I don't want to jump ahead, but I wanted to at least throw that nugget in there. All right.
Send it. You sent it?
All right. Next. Okay, water quality and water quantity contingencies. Disapproval of inspection or request for modifications. Insert the number of days buyer has to give written notice disapproving the inspection report for the water quality inspection and for the water quantity inspection. 15 days is the default for each. If buyer requests repairs to the system for water quality or water quantity or modifications to the agreement, the parties can negotiate using form 22RN. This is the well addendum response. So, like Andrew pointed out, this is a much longer time period. Why? Why do they have it that long?
Well, first thing is that, because I just experienced all this stuff on house, is finding somebody that can get out and do this stuff is hard to begin with, because there's very few vendors that do this stuff these
Yeah.
days. So finding somebody and then they're booked up every single day.
Yeah.
So finding somebody to get out there and the time period is the biggest thing. And then for them to send all the stuff to the lab and
That's
whatnot,
it.
it takes 7 to 10 days typically after they come out and take samples
Right.
from there. So, I mean, it could be something that's a 3-week process to get somebody out and then send it to the lab. Typically, you can pay for a rush to get those items done quicker when they get sent to the lab. But still, it's not a fast process at all.
It's not fast at all. I mean, that is exactly why. How many other addendums do you know that have a really long default period greater than the 10 days that we like typically see?
Just financing.
Financing, there's a few, but there's not many at all that are over the 10. So that's kind of telling you like, oh boy, yeah, this process is not gonna be quick and fast to get done.
And
Andrew's right, it's hard to find people to do
And sometimes they don't even show up.
them.
Like, that we had that experience where the first person. and
Didn't even show.
scrambled, Yeah, so then I ended up having to get an extension from the seller. And they didn't want to
You
give it.
gotta
Like,
watch the
look, if you don't wanna
timeline.
Give it, then we're done, like.
You got lucky on mine, man.
What about septic? Did that one?
Yeah.
There's time periods where septic can take longer, when they get really booked up, backed up, in the county and stuff like that. There can be more delays, but usually not. It's not like this.
Yeah, usually when you're dealing with land, you have longer delays.
Yeah.
There's more people to find than the subject stuff.
Oh, totally. Yeah, there's way
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
septic inspectors and people to handle that than there's wells. Yeah, so I would absolutely make sure you are not going under those time periods, or you're gonna end up, having your client accidentally waive the inspection. So does anyone have any idea what costs are for repairing wells?
That's a big question, Mike, because like the water filtration system,
Oh, yeah.
if there is anything that needs to get repaired under the water filtration system past the well, I mean, those systems are extremely expensive.
Yeah, I've seen one like 25 grand,
And then like,
major ones.
when you have a well inspector, they're gonna go out and they're gonna check the flow rate
Yeah.
of the well, of how much water is going per minute, and then they're gonna take samples of the water before and after typically, and then if there's somebody that knows what they're talking about, we're gonna go look at the system for you and tell you if there's any deficiencies, just like in the septic system.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely get recommendations, from your fellow brokers, to who can do the inspections, because Andrew's right, man, it's tough. Last time I think that had to deal with that. We literally had to keep calling around.
Yeah, when I had it, I just called numerous listing brokers in that immediate area that predominantly sold houses and just asked them well for like 3 recommendations. And when you hear them say the same.
Same
person,
names, a
yeah,
couple
then that's
times.
The person that we ended up using.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's a good way to do it.
And if you can't find one, I have a buddy that I end up calling for referrals for that stuff, that their company drills wells.
Oh,
So,
dang.
like, they know all those people that do that stuff, so.
That's,
Find
yeah,
yourself in a rock and a hard spot, you can find people that drill them and give recommendations from them.
no, that's good. All right, water quality contingency agreement. The agreement is contingent on buyer's approval of an inspection of the water quality and or purity test, organic and inorganic. Water quality test shall be performed by a qualified professional. The water quality and or purity test shall or shall not be submitted to a private lab for further evaluation. What do you guys think? You're representing a buyer. What do you think you're gonna want there? Yeah, you're gonna want to make sure the well's good. I've heard horror stories. The water quality contingencies shall conclusively be deemed waived. That's the exact same thing we went over. Buyer gives written notice, either A, disapproving the inspection report or terminating the agreement, or proposing repairs to the well related to water quality or modifications to the agreement. All right, we got to look, okay, 7 goes with the same thing. The quantity contingency, so you got both of the quality and the quantity. Please make these match. You're not gonna want these to be different. You got someone who's gonna be doing the exact same, test, for the client. Don't get some, you don't want this to be different. And again, if you're dealing with multiple offers, I know we're doing a lot of this right now. If, by chance you're trying to be competitive, when it comes to this section, you're probably gonna have to just obviously talk with the listing broker. Gonna say, look, as well as I do, we're not gonna be able to get a well inspection and the quantity and quality tests back and everything back from the lab in under 14 days. I mean, that's probably gonna be a miracle. We don't want, to risk this, getting missed and waived and having issues in the future. So, and I promise we'll be diligent about getting someone as soon as possible. You might even want to have someone kind of set up from the beginning and maybe even tell the listing brokers, like, look, we got someone ready to go. Even if you're waiving the actual home inspection contingency, but you still need a well. I mean, that's the one thing. Can you imagine a year later or 6 months later, your buyer calls you to go, hey, we have no more water. There's no water coming out. What do I do? We can't wash clothes, we can't take showers, we can't flush toilets, can't make coffee in the morning. This is a serious mess. What do I do? I think my wells run dry. Can that happen?
Yeah.
Are you telling me that's possible?
Better pay it right.
Can you? Oh, you remember that well contingency I told you should do, and you skipped it? I mean, how much are wells? How much are wells to dig new ones and everything? I mean, what do you think you'd
Well,
spend?
the first thing is you gotta go through the process. even-
Oh, yeah, permit. Yeah, you gotta get approval to get water.
Yeah.
Probably if you had one already, I mean, you got an if you had one and it ran dry, whatever, but that means you're probably digging deeper, or I don't know.
$75,000.
That all? 75?
Simple, easy money.
Can you imagine that? Chump change?
That's true.
Elizabeth says, I would just dig it myself then at that cost.
I actually have done the well before, several.
By hand?
Yes.
I believe that. I should do.
In
believe that.
Siberia? Did you have a little helmet on with a little light?
No.
Go down the,
And water system would be very close to the ground.
yeah, you have buckets on a pulley and everything and.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I do mine. in
Take
cat.
turns.
The deepest one.
They have to
that's
talk, I need to fill in my-
35 feet.
45 feet?
Find my pistol. Wow,
Don't tell Troy that, he might have you digging wells for clients. All right, you guys are gonna match up your days for both of the quality and quantity. And then, of course, buyer will make initials, page 2. So buyer request for repairs or modifications. If buyer requests repairs or modifications pursuant to paragraph 4A and or paragraph 4B, the party shall negotiate as set forth in this paragraph 4C. Buyer's initial request and seller's response made in accordance with the following procedures are irrevocable for the time period provided. So seller's response to request or repairs or modifications. Seller shall have 3 days, if not filled in, after receipt of buyer's request for modifications or repairs or modifications to give notice that seller, 1, agrees to the repairs or modifications proposed by buyer, or 2, agrees to some of the repairs or modifications proposed by buyer, or 3, rejects all repairs or modifications proposed by buyer, or 4, offers different or additional repairs or modifications. If seller agrees to terms of buyer's request for repairs or modifications, this contingency shall be satisfied and buyer's reply shall not be necessary. If seller does not agree to all buyer's repairs or modifications, buyer shall have an opportunity to reply as follows. What does this sound like?
35R.
Yeah, it sounds exactly like a 35R, except it's for a well. Okay, same thing, buyer's reply. If seller does not agree to all the repairs or modifications proposed by buyer, buyer shall have, get 3 days and not filled in from either the day buyer receives seller's response, or if seller fails to timely respond, the day seller's response period ends, whichever is earlier. To 1, accept to seller's response, at to which time this contingency shall be satisfied. 2, agree with the seller on other remedies, or 3, disapprove of the well inspection and terminate the agreement, in which event the earnest money shall be refunded to buyer. What form are you included with this? 22RN? 50. All right, these time periods for negotiating repairs or modifications shall not repeat. The parties must either reach a written agreement or buyer must terminate this agreement by the buyer's reply deadline set forth in paragraph 4C2. Buyer's inaction during buyer's reply period shall result in waiver of this well inspection contingency, in which case seller shall not be obligated to make any repairs or modifications whatsoever, and this contingency shall be deemed waived. So you got 5. Let's see, Gavin, you want to read 5? Or actually, before we go to that one, water rights transfer.
Parties acknowledge that water rights may not automatically transfer with title to the property, and the party should consult with an attorney to facilitate the transfer of any water rights. Such transfers may require the consent of third parties and governmental agencies. Any transfer costs, including obtaining any required consents, shall be paid by check seller or buyer.
All right, so it says right here that the water rights may not automatically transfer. That's the exact type of scenario we started talking about at the beginning of today's class. I think with title, it's not on title. There could be well agreements and maintenance agreements with people who share the well, or there could be community wells. How many total connections can a well have? What's the max? Huh?
That would be a lot. Community well.
Yeah.
Could be 20. As big as the neighborhood is.
Depends. Yeah, totally depends. There could be, I mean, the most I've heard is probably in the 30 to 40 range.
My dad's neighborhood, it's all, there's like 100 houses.
Yeah, 100 houses, community well. That's probably more than one. Oh, maybe not. I mean, I guess it depends.
So if it's community well, we do the inspection, right?
Mhm.
What's the company that runs it?
Washington Water Company.
Oh, so
it's not-
Washington Water Company is the management of the well.
Would that
of the
be
community
considered
well.
private still or shared?
That's a community
They'll be shared there.
shared.
And then, if they want to inspect it, how would we go about that? If it's like,
So your home inspector probably doesn't do the well inspection.
No.
You can ask, but I doubt it. And you probably wouldn't want them to. Cause in the form of what we read
Seems easy.
is the fact that an expert should be the one doing it.
Yeah.
A professional, right?
Right.
I would get referrals to get who can do the well inspection. It's a separate
Okay.
inspection. And it's one of those things that it's gonna be an additional cost to the client, right?
Cause they marked like private, publicly owned water system, and then if shared.
On the seller's disclosure.
No,
Not applicable.
Yeah, the listing agent on this one doesn't know what she's doing. It's only like $1 million. It's like, that's
So
not,
is
it's
she-
not private.
Is she positive it's a well or is it like a community?
No, she didn't know, but
Is
I
it community
know.
water?
She doesn't know. She,
And that is the seller too, is that
Yes.
correct?
yes,
Do they get a water bill?
she doesn't know. I don't
Believe
know.
Water would get shut off if you.
Yeah, I have no, clue. I don't know if she knows, but she's at a point,
Oh.
she's selling her own home essentially, which is a bad deal right now. We're away. And then we're helping her guide her way through while we're gonna win this offer too. And it's like, you can go with somebody else and then all will be screwed over, or you can have us who has over 40% down win this. And so I think we're gonna get it lower if we can help her with the,
Washington
Yeah.
Water Service Company.
so that,
Did you Google them and see what they,
Yeah, we're trying to
Manage?
Find the well, we're talking to the county today. We talked yesterday about the septic to the county, but we're talking.
she didn't know about
to
the septic.
she didn't know about the septic
Talking to
either.
somebody at the county today about the well to see what they have.
Where's the house at?
Deep Harbor. You wanted to?
See, there could be community water companies out there. It might not even be a well.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
She
But
may
she,
not be right. I don't know.
oh,
You
Oh,
might wanna
so-
call.
Yeah.
To see if there's another house that sold recently in the neighborhood that has a
There you go.
22K still uploaded.
yeah, that's what we're
Yeah.
looking at. And,
Good idea.
yeah.
All
I
right,
don't think there was.
local requirements, let's see. Karen, you wanna read that one? 6?
Six local requirements. Fire acknowledges that water supply requirements and water use limits vary by city, county, and watershed. Fire is advised to consult with an expert regarding water supply requirements and water use limits for the property.
Yeah, so there's a buyer beware little thing, right? And then we got number 7, other. Uh-oh, I almost went there. Yeah, Elizabeth, you wanna read 9?
This space is provided for any other agreements concerning the well or water system. Because this addendum supersedes all other well and water system provisions contained in the agreement, you should include all well-related agreements in this addendum.
Yeah, that's a little different than some of the other blank addendum, mini blank addendums we see in forms, right? So, I don't know, sometimes things I've seen in here is that like seller will agree to pay the transfer fee that associated with the well maintenance agreement. Because sometimes these agreements have like fees connected to them. But you're not gonna know any of that until you get the documentation. I think it's definitely a good idea to make sure you advise the buyer that this is one thing they cannot like skip out on as far as doing inspections for, because we don't have a ton of there's not a lot of them. It's like how many deals? I don't know, how many deals, has anyone not even had a house that they've sold yet, not even like even on a well? I know Andrew already has, you've had deals with wells, you guys have? No?
The only thing I really see them in rural areas, like Yelm, Roy, Rainier,
I'm on Covington.
like some places out in Maple Valley.
Maple Valley,
any of the
Covington, yeah.
islands,
Yeah,
they're all gonna be on wells out there, like Camano Island, Whidbey Island. Maybe some Bath Pond, maybe some Bainbridge, but all those places out there are all gonna be on wells.
what about Mercer Island?
Sure, there's some wells out there.
Might be,
would
I haven't
bet-
had one out there
I
yet,
would bet
but
there is.
I wouldn't doubt it.
It's been there for a long time, like there was, because that thing's pretty much. Compared to what it was in 66, yeah.
Even in some places in Renton, there is still, like when you start getting out to like
Oh,
Right.
Issaquah area and stuff like that, so.
yeah, oh yeah, that's true. Well, it's definitely something you don't want to skip, but if you needed to write in any, direct verbiage. Now, let's say you had an amazing listing broker and they went through and they said, hey, we want to make sure, with a well, like you had one of those organized people I told you the story about, they had all their documentation, they had the testing done for you, within like 3 weeks, they have everything like completely done and just handed it to you, say, here you go. My people were very, very good about upkeeping their well. They had it tested every 6 months on, like someone selling a car and they got the title and they got all the records for maintenance. These people were like gold like that, and they literally just gave it to you on a platter. Maybe then you could wait. I mean, it's possible, because there's definitely people out there that are like that. I had an estate sale and the family, like, that's what they did. They had records for everything. The pump house and everything was rebuilt like within 2 years, and they had crazy water filtration system on it. They said they spent like 29 grand on this thing, and it was like crazy. And they had everything. I mean, literally, they're like, here you go. And when the people did get the stuff, they had it tested. They still had it tested. But I don't know. It's one of those things that maybe the only time you would not do it. But you do need I would talk to your lender. If you talk to your lender about mortgages. Oh, look at that.
Here we need it.
Well. Aaron, any special things with loans when the property's serviced by a well?
Really, you don't have like a ton, I mean, I think we get that certificate, right, that says it's gone through, and I think that's all we really need.
But you need that. That's something that you'll look for.
We make sure we go to the county, make sure the website, that it's good to go, I think.
Oh,
But I've never really run into much of anything with wells, or, I just don't have a ton of them. But unless they come back, like FHA might require, with some
Yes.
of those tests, the portable, the water test or something like that.
yeah.
I think is what we need.
So government-backed loans possibly
Yeah,
will require it.
Certificate. I can look it up real fast. I just haven't done it.
Well, thank you for all that help.
Sorry, not a lot of.
I don't think that my lender even asked for anything, last transaction I did a few months ago.
Ah,
Yeah, I
good
don't
man.
really need a ton of stuff. I mean, it's all well, okay, great, because the appraisal will go through and look at that stuff too.
Yeah,
And say it's.
all right, thank you. Thank you.
I kind of look at it when the seller, the buyer may still want to do it, just like they didn't want to attend a septic pumping.
Yeah,
So they can talk to the person that's.
Yeah.
Understand the systems and what to do in the future and stuff, because even if there's a lab test that came back deficient, most of those things are easily able to get corrected.
yeah,
With certain, filtrations or the chemical blast or whatever it is that needs to take place. One of the places we did had high iron, and my client was concerned that there was high iron running through these copper lines for 20+ years. Is there gonna be a problem with the plumbing after I acquire it? And
that's a good question.
He bailed on the property because he was fearful of the whole house would need to get replumbed, because it looked like rust was coming out initially in the first burst of everything
Yeah,
because of the high iron. And then when you pull a toilet lid, you can see if it has like an orange yellow soot at the top, that it has high iron too.
mhm.
So it's able to get corrected.
Well, it's able to correct it, but yeah, it's things to do. All right, let's lastly look at the 22RN. This is the response form. This is what you'll be using when you're responding back, for that inspection. And you got your same multiple choices, right? Like the 35R. Buyer's inspection of the well is approved and the inspection contingency is satisfied, right? Same. Buyer's inspection of the well is disapproved and the agreement is terminated. The earnest money shall be refunded to buyer. Be marking that, boom, jumping straight to, with the Form 50 and on their way out. Or there's the last one, buyer's request for the following modifications and or repairs. Described below or on the attached pages. If seller agrees to these modifications or repairs, the well inspection contingency shall be deemed satisfied. So maybe they need to treat the well. I mean, basically, I will say, you know, on this modification request, just like any other modification request that that you do, the very best way to handle inspection responses is to get a bid. Get the person who's going to do that, the buyer wants to hire to do the fix or the repair, have them give a bid. And then you would just write, seller shall hire ABC well company to replace the, whatever, system. And perform all items on the attached bid. If this way, you don't have to worry about, there's no confusion. You don't have to worry about the words of should, sell, like, what did I see this week? Seller should. Seller should, what was it? Repair something. Yeah, it was like seller should repair this issue.
Should.
They should, but do they have to? No. I mean, you might as well use the word maybe.
Subject.
Yeah, so this just keeps you safe, right? The same way for any time you're doing something like that. And then, of course, on the flip side to a seller, you can always explain to the seller, say, look, seller, yeah, you probably can hire, XYZ well company, and they might do it for, $400 cheaper. But if we hire the person that the buyer wants them to fix the item, if there's any issues in the future past closing, who can we point to? Yeah, you could point to the buyer and the person they chose to hire. Doesn't that put a lot more protection on the seller? Yeah, isn't that kind of unique how that works? Yep, all right, so buyer puts those down. Next would be the same thing. So how many days does buyer have to supply this? By default?
3.
How many days? 3. Do they have to supply this form after? How many days for the contingency to get all the tests and everything done?
It was like, only 15.
Do you remember? More days.
That was 15.
15 days, right, to have all that done. So by the end of that 15th day, you better be sending this 22R or they've waived it. And they're buying the house as is. Same thing for home inspections, 35. It's that 9 p.m. deadline, right? That 9 p.m. deadline is the same. Like once you hit 9 p.m., it's dead. So 8:59. Literally, I think the closest timestamp I've ever seen in a deal come through was 8:58 and like 38 seconds. Like you talk about bringing that in super late, right below the deadline. I mean, and I know that there's times where you send it way before, but then the client doesn't sign it and complete it and get it to go, or you didn't send it over after. So those deadlines are super important. You better make sure you know them so you don't put your client in breach. All right, so once buyer sends the notice and the deadline is the 15 days by 9 p.m., before that, you've got to send this over and either doing one of the 3 choices. Then seller will have to respond. The only one that's, there's 2 that the seller won't respond to. The first one would be buyer's inspections, it's approved. It's already approved. And then the next one would be the buyer's terminating. That the seller has no response to either one of those. So seller's first choice is that seller agrees to all the modifications and repairs and buyer's request. The well inspection contingency is satisfied. The parties agreed to proceed to closing as provided in the agreement, and buyer's reply below is not necessary. ***. Like you don't need, how many times we'll get questions where people are like, doesn't the buyer have to sign off on that? There's another box. Like, nope, if the seller's in agreement, then you're done. But there could be the other options the seller has. Seller offers to correct only the following conditions described below or on the attached pages. So they could counter, or the seller rejects all proposals by buyer, period. They reject everything. And then the last is seller rejects all proposals by buyer, but proposes the following alternative modifications or repairs described below or on the attached pages. Obviously, if you can't fit it all on here, you would have to just do C attach
34, yeah.
form 34. All right, you would have to do that, then sign it, and then do the 34 to go with it, send it along, and that's how you're doing your counters. And same thing, when is this seller's response due
3 days.
to buyer's first request? 3 days, business days, and same thing, before 9 PM.
And I've had times where they don't even respond.
Okay, what if they don't respond?
You,
When do you respond?
on the 3 days.
If,
Certified.
if the timeline passes for the seller. And it's already the third day and it's 10 PM and you're like talking to your buyer and like, well, they didn't respond. It's exactly the same way that you deal with this as if the seller marked this, rejects all. It's
Yeah.
as if they did that. If they did that, now when does buyer have their last reply?
3.
You got 3 more business days exactly from that. So at that point, buyer can now have the response of buyer accepts seller's response and agrees to proceed to closing as provided in the agreement. So who knows? Maybe the buyer's like, oh, they got a better offer. We know the test is, we can take care of these things ourselves. I got the bid. I'm not worried about the $800. I'll do it later after closing. They could just agree and move forward. The seller's still locked in the deal.
Mhm.
They can't kick you to the curb. Even if, because we've seen that. A strategy a lot of times listen brokers will use, especially to confuse the other brokers on the other side, is like, oh, let's not respond at all.
Yeah.
And then they freak out. They're like, oh no, you didn't respond. We're like, yep, that's right, we didn't. It's like someone playing poker with somebody, they're not
Yeah.
showing you their cards. They're just like, yep, that's right, we didn't respond. So at that point, your buyer could still make the decision to move forward and just bypass that and say, okay, we're fine. And then they're like, oh man, we wanted you to walk because we had a much better offer.
So.
That's why it should be
if
no
the
question about
seller
boxing.
doesn't respond, then it's okay for their timeline to expire before you respond, or you need to respond again before their timeline is.
No. So it's the buyer gets their timeline to give, right, for the whole contingency. You've got to first get your response there, right? So you've sent that. By default, it's 3 business days for the seller to respond to your requests, right? You don't have to respond before their deadline because you got to give them their full deadline. So once their deadline is over, commencing day, yours begins, right? You just kind of pretend like, oh, the seller rejected all of our proposals, buyer. What do you want to do? Here's your options. We can terminate and walk and get your earnest money back now.
Yeah.
Or you could keep trying. So you could say this. Let's say they didn't respond at all. You will still follow your timeline no matter what. And buyer could do this because buyer gets their full 3 days, right?
Mhm.
So let's say buyer rejects seller's response, but offers the attached alternative proposal for modification or repair. Buyer acknowledges that the well inspection contingency will be waived unless buyer and seller reach written agreement, or buyer gives notice disapproving the well inspection and terminating the agreement before the deadline in paragraph 4C2 of the well inspection contingency, MLS form 22R. So you could mark this box, right? And you would do a form 34 and you would have the buyer sign this one, right? Let's just leave this blank and we pretending the seller didn't respond. All right. You could do a new form 34. You could keep sending this over and over. You could keep like making new 34s. Say, okay, let's try this. Let's see if they'll, go ahead and give 5,000 towards buyer's closing costs and prepaids and let them handle it themselves. You don't say they're handling the well, but that's the only request you make. You send that over and then there's still no response, but your deadline is still your deadline. Like it says, the timelines don't repeat after this last step. But the buyer has the right to keep making offers of a resolution. You could even be going back and forth, you could be talking back and forth with the listing broker. But they're like, yeah, I don't think they're gonna do anything, but they might do this. And so you could keep doing new 34s, sending the same deal signed by your buyer. And let's say you're on the very last day. It's on the last day, your deadline's at 9 PM and it's 6 o'clock. And you're like, man, I don't know if they're gonna respond. They want us to go away. You keep sending, right, all the way. And all of a sudden, maybe the buyer's like, I'm on a walk. They're not gonna budge, so let's just go ahead and walk. Now you just take that same 22RN for this well, addendum, and this same thing goes for a 35R. This same process is exactly the same. You could take it, and then at that point, now take that same 35R, and let's say maybe the seller did offer something, but the buyer doesn't, they weren't into agreement of it. The buyer cannot go back and say, oh, I will go ahead and accept what you wrote, seller. So that, regardless, that doesn't happen. They can't, because as soon as you counter what they've done, you can never go back, like that's gone. Now, can you write down exactly what they offered earlier on attached 34, with your last box checked? Yeah, you could do that. But who knows if they sign off on it? Even if it's the exact same thing that they did offer, you have to remember that you're countering what the seller was originally offering. So all of a sudden, let's just say that, yep, the buyer's like, I want to walk now. Now you would take that either 35R for an inspection or the 22RN, and you would just mark buyer rejects seller's response and disapproves the well inspection and terminates the agreement and gets a full return of the earnest money along with a Form 50. They have all the way until that deadline to do one or the other. So they can still terminate. They're protected. So that's how it works. Some people kind of get messed up, especially when a seller doesn't respond. Because then they're like, what does that mean? What do we do? Where my, they're so fixated on their deadline. And when it doesn't happen, then it just confuses brokers.
It's me a Northwest MLS boxing lead.
Oh, that'd be nice.
So,
All right, guys, that is wells in a nutshell. Hopefully you learned something today. Keep you guys out of trouble. Always something. All right, you guys, thank you. We'll see you on the next one.
okay.
Bye.